cool.
Whenever I'm around evil, I change into Ghost Rider.
So tonight you'll...
I believe so.
On February 16th,
You're freaking me out.
the adventure begins.
Let's ride.
Ghost Rider. You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. I feel like my skull's on fire, but I'm good.
Rated PG-13.
Welcome to the Cage Corner podcast, a podcast journey through the filmography of the great Nicolas Cage. I am your co-host, Captain Nostalgia, and our podcast, when it comes to Nicolas Cage, is just a little bit differently than other podcasts. First off, this is, if you are new to our show or returning, we are a spin-off show from our mother show, Victims and Villains. You guys can find it at victimsandvillains.net or wherever you guys get podcasts from. It is the marriage between pop culture and suicide prevention. And every film that we cover on this podcast comes courtesy of our patrons at our $5 tiers, who we are so grateful for. Basically, the way it works, you go to patreon.com/victimsandvillains, become a patron for $5, and you guys can pick any Nicolas Cage movie and help us on our goal to cover every single film that man has ever done and will ever do. Plus, you guys also get to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, film festivals, and more. So thank you guys to everyone that helps make this show and our mother show possible. But without further ado, this is Micah Kimbridge returning for this one.
Hey, what's up?
We're doing not one, but two Ghost Rider movies for this one. It's a double feature.
Heck yeah. So ready. I was going to say I loved these movies as a kid. I loved the first one as a kid.
I was in this weird stage where I grew up. We hung out last week, and I shared this with you and your wife.
Yeah.
I did not inherently grow up on Nicolas Cage. It's fascination with Cage started after I was an adult.
Okay.
So the campiness, I think Mandy was kind of really what turned everything around for me. And
that's a very recent and incredible starting point.
Yeah, once I saw that movie, I went through and watched Mom and Dad, and just went through some of his other things, and
sure,
everything that he's been doing. I'm just Redbox,
there you go,
theaters. Let's do this. Color Out of Space this year was probably one of my favorite theatrical releases that I've gotten to see.
Sure.
But this was a first viewing for me. I've never seen Ghost Rider or Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance.
Right.
We're doing this on two separate days, so we just got done riding the Ghost Rider wave. And I understand the hatred for this movie, but I also understand that there's an audience for this movie.
Right. And I mean, I think that kind of comes with any, I don't know, any movie that did not perform as desired. I honestly, we should probably look up how this movie performed, because I don't think the first one actually failed. It just didn't do great, on reviews. I'm pretty positive the second one actually tanked at the box office.
26% on Rotten Tomatoes, 48% on audience score.
Okay.
With a critics' consensus, quote, Ghost Rider is a sour mix of morose glum histrionox amidst jockey puns and hammy dialogue. So they're not wrong.
I was going to say they're completely right, but I fail to see the negativity in that comment.
So I feel like I have to preference this because doing, now, as of this recording, we've done 5 Friday the 13th on Victims and Villains.
Wow.
And our goal also is to cover that entire franchise.
Welcome to prime time.
That's actually Freddy, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, it is. I biffed it. I'm sorry.
It's all right. I'll forgive you. I can't speak for the listeners.
Come on, though. That's like that is the perfect cheesy line for any film. Like,
that gag is one of my favorites in
it's
horror.
incredible.
But I have to preface this when I'm talking about like movies like Ghost Rider and Friday the 13th. These movies are not inherently great movies,
No,
by any means, but they're fun and they're like campy, and you come back to them because of their fun nature.
Right. I was talking with a friend this week about movies, and he was like, I feel like with any sort of anything that you enjoy, you have your fine dining and your candy, right? Like, your fine dining might be movies that are held in high esteem, such as The Godfather and whatnot. We could all name movies, but your candy is the movie that's like, this is not good. I'm getting no substance from this. It's candy, but it's like, I like it.
So like fine dining would be something like Boys in the Hood, and candy would be something like Malibu's Most Wanted.
Okay.
I don't know why I went there.
I don't know why you did either.
But as soon as you said candy, I just remember them throwing B-Rad out of the club after he does the rap battle, and he's like, they call him Wonder Bread, so like Wonder Bread sweets. I just made that connection. But Ghost Rider,
right?
Yeah. So this was a first viewing for me.
Sure.
Incredibly campy, and incredibly also not what I was expecting. I feel like when you're talking about like being Satan's bounty hunter, essentially, and hell, and just a lot of these darker themes, like I'm expecting a dark movie.
Sure.
And I kind of almost expected like a borderline horror movie, and honestly,
ooh, if only.
Because like honestly, like Ghost Rider, like that's what I think of like when I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I think the imagery is there. I don't think the setting is there. I don't know a ton about Ghost Rider from a comic book standpoint, but I mean, he is still like, you still see him like in the city and stuff. I don't feel like it's like a particularly horrific setting necessarily, but I do get what you mean, and I feel like they sort of like, I don't think they set out to make a horror movie, but I do feel like they tried to maybe make up for that lack of darkness with, I don't know, some lighting effects, some of the CGI kind of thing.
Well, so what I know about Ghost Rider as a property, not as a movie, just solely as a Marvel Comics character, is surface level.
Yeah, same.
So, like, I had these preconceived notions that it's like, okay, like, Nicolas Cage is proven to be great in horror movies.
Sure.
Like, just weird, darker takes. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is kind of like what I'm going to be expecting, and it's not. Like, this movie, we're just going to jump into spoilers. This movie is, from its writing, just a number of... Oh, my wife just started watching The Crown.
Woo, Matt Smith.
It's just camp. Like, I feel like that's the only way I can describe this movie, is it's so campy.
Yeah.
And I feel like it falls into that, like, early 2000s trend of, like, superhero movies where it's just camp.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I feel like with the exception of, like, X-Men and maybe the Maguires, Spider-Man.
The first two. Yeah.
Like, those are, like, really kind of, like, the only serious ones we got in that era.
And even then, I mean, like, Spider-Man from the get-go was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek sort of character. So you did have, like, you wouldn't call it campy necessarily moments, but you definitely have moments where it's, like, really obvious humor that would, it's really kind of cheesy. But yeah, I think, I don't know, people used to give me a hard time for liking movies like Ghost Rider or, some earlier 2000s, even early 2010s, like superhero movies, because they're like, it's so cheesy, everybody's like, it's so cheesy. Even some people who like, who criticize Batman, Superman, for being kind of campy or for being kind of cheesy and some of the dialogue and stuff like that. And I think my angle always, to kind of, play devil's advocate, no Ghost Rider puns intended.
It's too late. It's already a Ghost Rider.
To play kind of devil's advocate is like, if I say the word comic, there are two things you can think of. You can think of, pictures on a page with dialogue, or you can think of a comedian, and so to me, it very much goes hand in hand. Like, comic books are meant to be, to some extent, kind of tongue-in-cheek, kind of cheesy. It's not something that, like, while I do think that it can detract from a good film and good writing for it to be campy or cheesy in its dialogue, I do not think it is altogether inappropriate for the medium.
Yeah. And so let's get into some trivia before we kind of get into this movie, because I was curious. Like, Ghost Rider is very much, I feel like, kind of on par with, like, Guardians of the Galaxy and
there is a cheesy movie.
Like Doctor Strange, like a lot of these, like, smaller Marvel heroes.
Okay, yeah.
So this movie began development. You want to take a guess at when it went in development?
Okay, can you tell me when it came out first? Because I can't remember.
2007.
2007. Wow, that's later than I thought. I'm going to say 2002.
1992.
Yo.
So
I was not alive.
So 1992, it kind of lied dormant for a few years. 2000s, kind of where it started to pick up some steam. Marvel started to kind of, like, this was kind of where they
not be bankrupt anymore.
Yeah, they were starting to sell off their properties. They did it with DC, or not DC, with the X-Men. They did it with Spider-Man. They did it with a large portion of, like, their more famously known characters
too, right?
And Hulk. That's actually going to come up here in just a few minutes. Production was supposed to start in 2001 originally,
which is still real late for development in 92.
You ready for who they originally were going to go after, or who experienced wanting to do this? And after this prison scene, I can't see anything else other than Johnny or Nicolas Cage doing this. But I said Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp?
Johnny Depp was
Knoxville, maybe, not Depp. No, that's weird. Although, okay, if they had gone for a darker tone than we got, maybe.
You ready for the Hulk connection?
Sure, yeah.
Eric Bana was originally offered the role, but he opted out to do Hulk instead.
I really have no comment for that. I feel like I've not seen him in anything else, honestly. That could have been cool, I guess. In
June, this is coming right from the Wikipedia, in June 2001, actor and Ghost Rider fan Nicolas Cage entered talks to be cast in the lead role after having found out about Depp being a possibility for the role and contacted the director to express his own interest. That director that was originally attached at the time, he left, and Cage actually left as well, and then once Columbia Pictures got the rights in 2002 from Dimension Films at the time, they basically hired another writer to write it, and then kind of started going through some of the earlier phases.
Were the original writers, director, or writer or director, were they notable, or was it just?
So the original writer was David S. Goyer, who Blade, Dark Knight.
Okay.
Man of Steel.
So, like, he had prior experience.
Yes.
Okay. That could have been, we could have gotten a way darker movie.
So, they set production to begin in late 2003/early 2004, but it was delayed to October 2003 because Cage had to temporarily leave due to his production on The Weatherman, which you guys can go check out the Victims and Villains episode from on The Weatherman. So they tentatively were like, okay, we're going to start in like June, May 2004, which again, 1992. I mean, this is still a long road.
Yeah.
It was delayed again because of script issues. 2005, they started really adding in a lot of the other elements. Sure. Wes Bentley, who plays the villain, Blackheart was cast thanks to Colin Farrell. all people. Farrell apparently knew him and was like,
Wow.
hey, you should hire this guy. Eva Mendes was cast, and then roughly around 2005 is kind of when we started getting it. Ghost Rider was originally scheduled to be released on August 4th, 2006, but the date was moved 3 weeks earlier to July 14th, 2006. 2006,
yeah.
Sony changed its release date once more to February 16th, 2007 to help relieve the studio's crowded 2006 schedule.
Sure.
Crazy.
Wow. That's wild. Do you think, like, we did Superman Lives. We did that film, or The Death of Superman Lives, the biography. Do you think maybe as a comic book fan and as a Ghost Rider fan, which you stated, do you think this was maybe some sort of like solace for Nick Cage not getting to be Superman, maybe?
I mean, so like comparing the characters of like Ghost Rider and Superman,
Yeah, there's not much
are
there.
literally like comparing Jesus and Satan. Because, one you have is like this like near omnipotent God
Yeah.
with like nearly no
Power limit.
power, like has no power limit and really has no weakness.
Yeah.
And then on the other one, you also have this one who's like contracted by
By the devil.
the devil. So he does it out of necessity, whereas Superman, he just does it out of the kindness of his heart.
Sure, yeah.
But I mean,
I was like as a comic book fan.
as a
though,
comic book
like,
fan, I definitely think that he was like
yeah.
jumped at the
I
chance
only-
for that.
I only asked that question for one because we did, cover that film, but also because like I don't know. I mean, he stayed on for a movie for years before production began.
Yeah.
Like and I mean through a director change, a writer change, like, and that was all after the kerfuffle that was Superman Lives that didn't happen. That's pretty brave, honestly, of Nick Cage to stick it out again for a superhero film.
Well, so let's jump in and start talking about this movie.
Sure.
And this movie is released 2007. You grew up with it.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't.
Sure.
So we're coming at this from two separate angles here tonight.
Yeah.
I have to honestly start with... I feel like let's start off on a positive note.
Sure.
This cast is incredible.
Oh my gosh, so good.
So good.
Yeah, I mean, Nick Cage honestly was a very good choice. Like, he did a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like for the tone that they set for the movie, Nicolas Cage was the perfect guy to have.
Yeah.
Because I feel like had you had some of those other writers, we could have... So that's the thing is, like, when you're talking about David S. Goyer possibly writing this, it could have been that kind of darker but still, like, lighthearted at the same time, that because he walks that very thin line in Blade, I believe. And then having, but he also does it in Dark Knight.
Sure.
So I think that it would have been darker, but you would have those, like, kind of almost like Marvel comedic timing moments.
Sure.
MCU. But
Yeah.
I think at the same time, like, Nicolas Cage, for what this script is does an incredible job.
Yeah.
But you also have Eva Mendes in this, who was like kind of going through the height of her career as well. And then I think Sam Elliott.
Oh my gosh.
Like, the addition of him
Yeah.
made me appreciate this movie even more, because this is Johnny Blaze's story, and
Right.
a lot of people, this is like their entry point into the mythos of Ghost Rider.
Right.
And I think that they did a really good job at kind of saying, like, Johnny Blaze is kind of like the the Hal Jordan of this universe.
Yeah.
Like, he's the one that most people recognize, but there were others before him.
Right.
There are others after him.
There are,
and
yeah.
getting to see the two Ghost Riders riding side by side was one of my favorite moments in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That was gorgeous. I think, like, also with sort of having like a Western setting and things like that. I mean, there's a good amount of city scenes, but there's a ton of beautiful rural shots, ton of deserts, really great feel for that. And to have someone who like has that sort of like just cowboy drawl and background, like Sam Elliott just be such a presence in the movie, was a really great way to kind of like tie in the mythos in a really kind of unique way. I think that was really great. The guy who plays Mephistopheles, why they call him Mephistopheles, I'm not sure, because that's not what they call him in the Marvel comic book. But that guy was incredible. Like, I want to see more of him.
So Peter Fonda is the guy that plays him. And Peter Fonda, I mean, he's a world-renowned actor.
Maybe I have seen more of him then.
You know, he did Easy Rider, 3:10 to Yuma, Wild Hogs. I mean, and that's just kind of
so he has
like
IMDb. Biker kind of roots.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. That's really cool.
And I'm almost curious if they called her. So I don't know if you know this, but like in the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies that we've gotten so far, Zendaya plays MJ. Sure. And they do that something because of like the rights where they can't say Mary Jane.
Weird. Okay.
Which is incredibly weird. Yeah. But I'm almost kind of curious because if you know anything about the comics, you know, he's Manifesto. Right. That's just his name. So to call him
Mephistopheles.
Mephistopheles,
yeah.
And like it's spelled like Manifesto, and then you put Stollies on the end of it.
Right.
So it's like
super similar.
It's like super weird, but I'm almost kind of curious if like there's like a rights issue that kind of got lost in the translation.
That makes sense.
There.
I mean, Mephisto is like a very archaic title for the devil, but I mean, it's not like they made it up.
Whereas Mephistopheles, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
It sounds more like a trickster name almost.
Yeah, kind of does. Yeah. I don't know. That's pretty interesting. Gosh, notable cast. The guy who plays Harvey in Gotham, you mentioned
Donald Logue.
Yeah.
I love and adore this guy. And the first act where like it's right before Cage gets called on to be the bounty hunter.
Yeah.
And for his like first transformation, their back and forth and their chemistry completely sold me on this movie.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, and like 20 minutes into it, just their back and forth, their banter was so great. Nicolas Cage laughing at chimps doing karate.
That's something I don't, again, and maybe this knowledge of the comic books would provide more of a background for that, but that's something I don't really understand about the movie is like how kind of like they make him like he's a person who's trying to like head toward innocence. Like he's trying to like, oh no, I don't want to watch this stunt thing. I don't want to watch this. I want to watch this nature documentary, and I want to like laugh at simple TV shows. And like, I'm wondering if he maybe like has sort of like there's like, you know, he keeps talking about it's not okay to live in fear. You don't have to live in fear. And I'm wondering if it's kind of his way as a character of like combating that inner fear of like knowing what he did, the deal that he made, you know.
Well, it's like Dwight Schrute says, nostalgia is a powerful tool. So I'm almost curious if like there's nostalgia in it for him.
Sure.
You know, because I would think that like his connection to like monkeys doing weird things like that, it's almost kind of like a Carney trick, which is where the environment of where he was raised around. So it kind of makes sense, and he does it while like he doesn't drink, but he takes fancy wine glasses and fills them with jelly beans.
Yeah, he takes martini glasses and put jelly beans in it. It's and then he like twirls it too before he eats them. This movie has so many like little details like that are just like, I don't know why they did that, but bravo.
And then he likes when they get back to his apartment, it's him and Mac, who's Daniel or Logal's character, and like, you know, when you go to like someone's house or apartment, you're expecting to like be offered like water, soda, a beer, you know, something along those lines.
Sure, a drink.
Nope. You want some jellies? That's what happens when you go to Johnny Blaze's house.
What he says. Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things where it's just like, and a diehard Ghost Rider fan I don't know if that's part of Ghost Rider character, but you know, if you have an expectation of this movie for something darker, you might kind of scoff at that, but it's so fun. It's just so silly.
This movie feels like an adaptation to me.
Yeah?
Like it doesn't feel like a comic book movie, it feels like an adaptation. It's like they got people that knew like the bare gist of the mythology surrounding Ghost Rider, and they're like, we'll just make a movie around that. So they make Johnny Blaze like their own character, like how they would inherently see him.
Right.
Kind of almost like they did with Van Forstick a few years ago, where they were trying to like give this like deep, gritty reboot of Fantastic Four, and it just didn't feel like those characters because
Fantastic Four aren't gritty.
No, Fantastic Four is like one of like the most like wholesome
they're
comics.
A family, yeah.
And that's kind of almost like those little details that you get throughout. Like that's kind of what I took it as. Like this is not inherently a comic book movie. This is an adaptation of a comic book property.
That makes sense.
And so like a great example of this is so since 2006 they have been trying to get a Hellraiser reboot off the ground.
Okay. Wait,
And
Hellraiser like Constantine?
Pinhead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I went comic books. Okay, go on.
But one of the things that like Pinhead's that is a very niche property.
Yeah, great,
And
but very
it's
niche.
great, but it's very niche.
Yeah.
And one of the things that like the studio keeps turning away the pitches is because they are looking for a property that's going to appeal to the widest audience. So in order to appeal to a wide audience, you have to strip away a lot of the things that make that character
Hellraiser.
that character.
Yeah, make Pinhead. That's
And that's kind of almost how it feels like with Ghost Rider. Like
Right.
you have probably a darker comic book that you're stripping away what makes that character so incredible to sell him to a wider audience.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, that's kind of a cool notion and idea there, and that's probably like, I think even the casting may sort of reflect that a little bit, where it's like, hey, let's go with Nick Cage because he's big. Hey, let's go with Eva Mendes because people think she's attractive, and like let's sell the crap out of this thing. And because honestly, you look at it, and I don't think Marvel's even attached to it. Not until you get to like the credits as you're watching the movie.
No, they had the opening too because their logo kind of transforms into his bike grill.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah,
but I also think at this time, like, comic book movies aren't what they are now.
Marvel movies are not what they are now. Marvel movies.
People still come out and DC still has a couple $1 billion properties under their label, but I just throwing that as an example.
Sure.
Like you have to consider the context, and movies at that time weren't sold on we're sold on names.
Yeah.
So you're selling movies that might not necessarily draw a big crowd in if like Ray Fisher, who plays Cyborg in Justice League, complete unknown.
Sure.
The only reason that people know him is from Cyborg. So if he was going to be heading up like a buddy comedy movie with John Boyega from Star Wars, 5 years ago, before Justice League, before Star Wars, nobody would have come and saw that movie.
Right.
Because it's unknowns.
Right.
And most people, when they go to the movies, they're expecting spectacles. And so when you have an actor like Nicolas Cage that at that time had done The Rock, had done Con Air, had done Family Man, National Treasure, you're going to see
that actor. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're going because you're a fan. I mean, it's like he's built a reputation, and they're capitalizing on the reputation. That's all it is. Yeah.
But the script that we ended up getting comes from Mark Steven Johnson, who is also the director on this. Mm-hmm. And this is the guy that he has gone on. Oh man, this makes me incredibly sad going through his filmography.
Let's hear it.
So, would you
his
like
directorial?
Would you like to know what he did before Ghost Rider?
Please.
2003's Daredevil.
All right. So, like, that's terrible, But at the same time, that there are people who still love that movie.
As a writer, he also, before Ghost Rider, did Elektra and Jack Frost. Jack Frost is the movie with Michael Keaton turning into the snowman.
Go on.
It's a great movie.
Okay.
It's a highly underrated movie. He did a buddy comedy movie with Rick Moranis, Tom Arnold, and then he did Grumpy Old Men, and Grumpier Old Men. So he's an interesting choice, but he also wrote Christopher Robin, which is one of my favorite movies that came out a couple years ago.
Sure.
But it's still weird to kind of have someone like that kind of come into it, and like when you have that background of Grumpy Old Men, Daredevil, Elektra, Jack Frost, like those are all really mostly terribly written movies.
Yeah.
And I feel like to a sense, like that is definitely. Hold on. I feel like to an extent that this movie reflects that.
Yeah.
Like the writing is
I mean, yeah. No, the writing's not great. Like
is pretty bad.
The problem, my biggest problem, to be honest with you, is probably pacing. Because the movie, like, the first 30 minutes of the movie is like, it feels like half the plot. Because they have to like, oh, this is this guy, and this is what happens, and this is how this happens, and it just all feels really forced and rushed, and like, you know, the movie's like what, like $1.30, $1.40, like.
Oh, it's an hour 50.
It's an hour 50.
Yeah.
Total.
Yeah.
Man, I did not feel like an hour 50.
But I think one of my biggest problems with this plot is the fact that this is an entry point into a lot of people's introduction to Ghost Rider.
Right.
And you have not one, but 5 villains in this.
Right, right.
Like we talked about Mephistopheles.
Yeah.
But Blackheart, who Wes Bentley plays in this one, he's one of 5. So it's like, what do they call? It's like something like the Willow, or
I don't remember all their names. They have weird names.
It's like, so like their group got given a name. And
I did not notice that.
It is very brief, but the way that he describes it, because I think it's Sam Elliott that kind of gives like this like exposition on
yeah, you're right.
Blackheart's kind of quote unquote gang,
right?
And it's like it's like son rebelling against father because Blackheart is Mephistopheles' son,
mm-hmm.
and they're like coming to like rebel this like rogue contract that would bring hell on earth.
Right, basically.
And first off, as a villain, so cliche.
Sure. Yeah, very cliche. And like, yeah, poorly done. I mean, I feel like they do more in his image to project like his character than they do with like his dialogue and the way he delivers it.
So this is my problem with Wes Bentley as Blackheart in this movie, mm-hmm. is that we meet him, he walks into a bar and basically kills off every patron that is in there. And I'm like, okay, this guy clearly from hell, clearly we have a true threat that's getting ready to come up, and then he just kind of like really like draws like complete flat. So his crew is made up of Evil Wind with bad hair, Sad Aquaman,
incredible,
and dude who looks like he's on the verge of being a reptile.
Yeah, which is weird because he's supposed to be like Earth. Like, because they're supposed to be basically hidden in the elements until the end of days. That's what their they like are slated as. And you see Johnny like reading in one of his like weird books that they're like named the Nephilim, which is a biblical title for something different. Yeah, and it's really weird. I don't even know if those guys are in the comic book. I know Blackheart is, but it's funny that you use the word gang because that's really what it feels like.
But
it's not well established.
So it's well established in the script that we meet this crew first, and then we understand them through exposition.
Yeah,
and like you had said, like they are the elements.
Yeah.
But their introduction completely contradicts that.
So you know what I think? I think so. Like one of my problems with this movie is that like they have great potential for a Western motif, even as a genre. They had a great potential to make a like modern Western film, and they don't. And I think that like what you're describing, the way they show up and do their thing way before they're explained, I think they're trying to pull off like Western like storyboarding. Because a lot of times Westerns sort of rely on visuals more than dialogue. I could be wrong, and I agree with you that it's bad, but I'm sort of wondering if maybe that was their take.
And maybe it is, I mean, because it's going to be a long time before we kind of understand that comic book movies don't just have to be comic book movies.
Right, yeah, they did not really get that at this point, that's true.
Like,
I mean, you could argue that with Blade, because Blade you could market very easily as horror films. They don't really feel like superhero films, but that would be the only exception, yeah.
Well, so I think a lot of people, you hear the word comic book movies and you immediately think of tights. Like it's exactly where you go to, and people fail to understand that The Crow, before this movie ever got made, The Crow 1994, Road to Perdition 2002, History of Violence in 2006, they're all like graphic novels, stories.
Howard the Duck
that 1986 that had gotten made, and Star Wars taught us that Westerns don't have to feel like this town ain't big enough for the two of us.
Yeah, it's not all Dirty Harry. Yeah.
But I think we're still as a population, like our mindset of 2007 comic book movies is that they still have to be superhero.
Yeah,
and
you have an expectation.
This feels like a superhero movie.
It does, which like is sort of to its credit. It like succeeds in that, but it begs the question of like, maybe it shouldn't have. Maybe it would have been better if they drew out some of that exposition and went for the Western motif instead of, and you pointed this out, like halfway, if that, through the movie, Ghost Rider is riding up a skyscraper and fighting cops on top.
That entire sequence is so pointless.
I don't think it's entirely pointless because it's like you get to see what Ghost Rider can do, but it serves little to no point in the story at all.
Yeah, I mean, except for that like aerial shot where Blackheart is just conveniently right there, and he's like, so he does have a weakness.
Yeah, I think, this movie like kind of relies a lot on the concept of fate, but they don't state it. And so a lot of it's like, oh, that's, she was right there looking out the window. How appropriate, and like that kind of thing. And it's not, I don't think that idea as its own sort of writing device is bad, but do it better.
This movie contradicts itself. It contradicts itself quite a bit.
You think so?
I do. So think about it. Okay, so the first meeting between Cage and Fonda, when he gets the call, hey, like you made this deal with me 20 years ago, I'm coming to claim it.
Sure.
And he's like, look, I'll give you your freedom as long as you bring in this contract back to me.
Yeah.
Consider our debt paid.
Yeah.
Cool. That's his entire motivation throughout the entire movie. Gets to the end, completes the journey. Manifesto. I'm just gonna call him
Manifesto.
Walmart Manifesto. offers him his
great actor.
offers him his freedom, and he's just like,
no.
I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna wear this curse with honor. And hunt you down. It really contradicts each other.
Yeah, no, I mean, as a kid, I liked that because it was like cool, but he has no reason to at all. And then it even shows like it separates him from the girl, and it's just like, yeah, it was basically just like, hey, we need to set up for a sequel. Okay, how about this? And they ran with their first idea, and it was poorly executed.
So I don't want to seem like I'm bagging on this movie so much.
No, it's a fun movie.
I honestly thought I had a blast with this movie. One of the things that kept like really like irritating me throughout the entirety of this movie. This movie takes place in Texas.
Yeah.
It's led to believe that he's from Texas, which by trade would also make Roxanne from Texas.
Yeah.
And would also make Mac from Texas.
Yeah.
But much like Halle Berry's Storm in the first X-Men, you ever like driven through a town and you're listening to the radio and the radio just kind of like fades in and out? Like you get that static.
Oh man.
That's how it feels with these southern accents.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even notice that Logue had one until the first meeting between him and Roxanne, and he's like screaming at her about like where Johnny is and like how the cops are after him.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think he's supposed to have a southern accent.
Right.
But that drawl just keeps fading in and out.
Yeah.
And somehow like Eva Mendes doesn't have one at all. Like I'm so glad that they were just like straight up like,
yeah,
you can just be Eva Mendes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe again, there could have been like more explanation for that. Maybe she wasn't from Texas or whatever. But yeah, I'm glad they did not like try to give her something that she couldn't hold up. I will say that Nick Cage held that accent down. And it wasn't even like, it was like actually kind of subtle, but it was nice.
I could hear it going in and out.
Could you?
I could.
I don't know. I thought it was fine. I thought it was good.
He was really good. When he was calm, he was really good at it. But when he got into his Nick Cageisms, out it went.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess I feel like I didn't notice that, but all right. Also, speaking of the Nick Cage isms, like when he is transforming into Ghost Rider.
Oh, you mean like when he's in that prison cell?
Yeah,
dude, it's one of the best scenes. In
it is. Nobody but Nick Cage could have done that well. Like it was beautiful.
Again, I think it plays to like they knew like Johnson, the guy that directed this and wrote it, like knew that they had Cage locked.
Right.
So if you know that you have your actor locked and it's on an established property, you have the benefit of writing that character to the strength of that actor. Whereas most processes for films like this, it's the opposite way, to where you have the established IP, the script is written, and then the actor has to manifest themselves into that character. Mm-hmm. Whereas this one, you kind of have that opposite luck, and they definitely do a phenomenal job with it.
Oh, for sure. Like Nick Cage, like there are so many other movies we could probably be talking about that Nick Cage is in, but like Nick Cage is the star of this movie, and it is evident, and it feels like no one could have done what they wrote like Nick Cage did. The movie's poor quality and campiness at times aside, it is fun, and Nick Cage facilitates the crap out of that fun, and he does a great job with the character.
And I love the way that, like, with him in particular, that they constantly just, like, he has this, like, death wish, and he's, like, waiting on a sign.
Yeah.
And I love that bit of his character, and, like, that he always kind of, like, always holds true to, like, who he is, and doesn't care that, like, you know, he's a shy guy. Like, this event, like, traumatized him to a point where, like, he doesn't want in the public eye. He doesn't want to, you know, give interviews. He doesn't want to, like, be boastful and gloat. Like,
yeah. And he's really awkward when he is in those situations.
And, like, he's, like, really humble.
Yeah.
I thought Ricky Bobby's, like, first interview was weird. The interview that he does between him and Eva Mendes, like, the first time is him and Roxanne reuniting after, like, 15, 20 years. super awkward.
Yeah.
So you got a boyfriend now?
Yeah.
And then just that awkward like pause. It's like,
yeah, and he's just like, oh yeah. Fantastic.
I love it so much.
So earlier, Josh, you wanted to talk about the special effects in this movie.
Oh yes. Ghost Rider looks really awesome.
Yeah, and like obviously we have better special effects now, but he, things do age poorly. He doesn't age as poorly as other things in this movie, if that makes sense.
So this is my theory. much like you have the Western theory, I have the special effects theory to where they had a budget, poured it all into Ghost Rider because he's the title character. So they're like, we got maybe like $2 nickels we can scrape together for the rest of these Element guys. Like Wes Bentley in this movie and all of his like.
Oh, you should see what he's supposed to look like.
Look terrible. Pull up a picture right now and show me
what Blackheart looks like.
What Blackheart looks like, because he looks terrible. That looks amazing. Like
they didn't try. They didn't try at all. Like
no. So it's like this movie comes on the heels of like the Twilight fandom coming in, because
okay.
So it's like they almost tried to kind of make him like a vampire almost.
Yeah, that's really. Yeah, you're completely right. Like, he would have been a much more believable vampire than he was apparently a demon. I personally think that, like, I don't think that you're wrong. I think they spent a lot of the budget on Ghost Rider because he's, like, the star or whatever. But I think my thing is he describes himself multiple times in the movie as a monster, and that's pretty apt. But it's like this hero is a monster, and he's fighting demons. And the demons kind of look like people. Like, like it doesn't have the same, like, I want call and response, like if I have a big bad hero, I want a slightly bigger bad villain.
Yeah.
And you don't get it. You get like some scenes where he has some nasty teeth and some lights in a church go dim.
It's kind of almost like, so Dark Phoenix last year is a great example of this, where they completely changed the ending of this giant space epic.
Sure.
To place it in are you ready for this? A train. And so they placed this climactic battle in a train and mansion because they didn't want to copy off of Captain Marvel. Cool, whatever. Here's the thing, though.
That's a terrible movie.
When you are talking about one of the most beloved space epics,
sure,
in comics,
sure,
with one of the most established properties in the X-Men.
Not only in the X-Men, but the X-Men themselves being, I'm going to go ahead and go on a limb and say this. The X-Men as a movie franchise is more established than Marvel is as a movie franchise.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about that, like, you can't, that's not a decision that you make. Sure. Because they did it with X3, and that is literally, it's like putting salt in a wound right before your eyes.
Yeah.
And then they did it again with Dark Phoenix. And Sophie Turner is an incredible actress, and you just did her dirty in that way. And so it kind of almost feels like the same with the Blackheart character here, where, like, you're trying to ground them.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't ground this mythology. Like, you can ground Ghost Rider to a T, but you have to understand that his lore is based in hell. It is based in otherworldly, supernatural, interdimensional, borderline space epic styled powers and heroes and villains.
Yeah.
And this movie completely robs.
No. I mean, the villains all look like they're from The Matrix.
That's an apt decision.
All of them. And I mean, it's like, this doesn't look bad. It's just not appropriate. And it doesn't measure. It's like I said, it's like if I get a big bad hero, I want the opposition to be equal time at minimum. I want at least that big bad, if not a little bit bigger of a villain. That way, it's harder for him to take down, but he does it in the end, and everybody feels good about it.
Well, I think, too, like, again, it comes in the context of where we were as a movie-going audience. Because think about it. So, for X-Men's a great example. Who do you have as the villains in those first 3 movies? You have Magneto, a man. Mm-hmm. You have Stryker, a man. Mm-hmm. You have Dark, the Jean Grey, a woman, still a human.
Sure.
Even looking at the Spider-Man franchise, you have Green Goblin, a man.
Yep.
You have Doc Ock, a man. Even the third one, you have Sandman, a man.
Yeah, the guy from George of the Jungle, yeah.
So you have all of these human-centric antagonists,
right?
But you also have to look at them in the property of you X-Men. They're mutants, but they are still people at heart.
People. Yeah.
Spider-Man, still a man at heart.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of my point, is just like, if you're going to have men or man-looking people, you know, like, they're obviously not Homo sapiens, they're mutants, but, like, they're fighting other people. But Ghost Rider is, I mean, he's bipedal, but he's a monster, you know, and you can't just have him fighting dudes that look like, you know, even if they would have made it like a transformation, even if they'd have introduced Blackheart the way that he looked, and then like 3/4 of the way through the movie, or like the last 20 minutes, he transforms into something else. Even that would have been more appropriate.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you took it in like terms of like, say, Alien or Friday the 13th, where you're showing something from the villain's point of view, but you're not inherently showing the villain,
right?
That's fine.
Yeah.
Like, but again, I think they're like, okay, we have to really sell this. And I think Wes Bentley at this time, like, is not a household name.
No.
So
is he now?
I mean, he's done like Interstellar, Hunger Games. He's done a couple other movies. So like,
sure.
He's recognizable, but I don't think like people will be like, oh yeah, Wes Bentley, like, unless you're like a real cinephile.
Yeah.
But to his credit, I mean, like, he's just not very intimidating in this movie.
Not at all. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of the reason they put him in a trench coat. It's because like trench coats are intimidating because they're long and black, and that was it. And it's the Matrix logic, you know?
Yeah,
yeah.
And I think one other thing too, that like, it's not just the CGI; it's also we talked about this in the beginning of the movie as we were watching it. The set designs for these things look amazing.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
So beautiful. The shots of just like the way that they'll set up like city or country, especially in the first act, I feel like is where it's most predominant.
Yeah, you're right.
Really gorgeous.
Yeah.
Costume design, not so much.
No. I mean, Ghost Rider is cool, and then he gets a little bit better. And then like him in his like, in his, I don't want to call it a uniform, but, you know, what he wears when he does his, like, trick stunts and stuff is fine. You know, it's all color matching and stuff. But, yeah, it's just cloaks.
Well, so, like, my biggest problem with this is Johnny Blaze and Wind Dude.
Okay, yeah.
Their wigs are atrocious.
Did you confirm that that's a wig that Nick Cage is wearing?
It looks like a wig.
I don't know. I could believe it either way. Like,
but a Wind guy looks like a wig because
no, that does.
His just like,
yeah.
It just looks like someone took like shingles and just like mounted them into like almost like a Christmas tree fashion and set them on top of his head.
Yeah, no, the Wind guy looks super terrible. I don't know, like, if you told me that Johnny Blaze was wearing a wig, I'd be like, okay, that kind of makes sense. I can kind of see it because Nick Cage's bangs don't really look like that. But I don't know, he could have just grown his hair out a little bit and like styled it differently. It could have been nothing else. I don't know why they would have needed him to have different hair.
It looks plastic to me. And you look it up real quick.
All right, I'm looking it up.
This is my complaint though, is that if you're so concerned about whether or not Johnny's hair is gonna be good, like, if you spent half that time like actually caring about other character designs, this movie would have been 10 times better.
It is a wig. Yeah, you're right.
You ready for this?
Yep.
This is in the comics, according to this Wikipedia article, Johnny Blaze is a hard-drinking and smoking badass. But Nicolas Cage decided to give him more depth. Quote, I'm playing him like someone who made this deal, and he's trying to avoid confronting it. Anything he can do to keep it away from him. Cage also explained that Blaze's stunt riding was a form of escape and a way to keep him connected to his deceased father, who taught him how to ride. Cage rode the Belial motorcycle for Blaze's stunt cycle and heavily customized hardtail chopper named Grace, which transforms into Hellcycle. I was close when we said the movie Hellcycle. But that's kind of cool. That's a cool little nod right there. But it kind of comes through. Like, again, I feel like a hard drinking, smoking badass probably would not fit in this movie.
Yeah. No, for sure. But they also started him at like 17.
That's very true. Like, the origin and like the foundation that they do in this movie is actually really good.
Yeah.
Like, I like the fact that we start out on Sam Elliott's narration and we kind of progress into Johnny and his father's relationship, and then you kind of get to see how his life is after his father dies, and then you kind of move into the whole meat of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm still looking up stuff.
Well, you got anything else?
Honestly, I'm just really excited to watch the second one. I've only seen it the one time. I'm looking at it. It got even worse reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, but apparently audiences liked it more.
That's amazing.
Apparently, yeah. I don't know if that has anything to do with the casting. The casting remains great. Idris Elba is in this film.
I saw that.
Like, yeah. So I'm really, apparently too, I was reading something that was a main differentiator between the first and the second film is like Nicolas Cage actually plays Ghost Rider in this.
Oh.
Yeah. So I don't know if that means that like they mocapped him and he did the voice. I assume that's what that means. But yeah.
So it's interesting because I heard that after the first one that we're talking about right now wasn't that well received. Like, it didn't really make them, like, they basically broke even.
Sure.
They didn't make anything off this.
Right.
And I heard that it was kind of supposed to be like a soft reboot with him.
Yeah, that's kind of like what what you know, this article was saying is like it's less of a sequel, a little bit more of a reboot. It did not fail at all. Its budget was $75 million. At box office, $132. It did not fail at all. I mean, it didn't like
it made
anything out of the water.
Budget back, but it did not clear the marketing budget.
Ooh, I never think of that.
So, but before we go to commercial break, before we come back and start talking about Spirit of Vengeance, because I'm all jacked to talk about this movie now, man. Too. Where would this rank on you on our Cage scale? 0 to 5, and yes, you are allowed to do halves.
Yo, okay. I mean, I hate to vote on a nostalgia factor here. I was 14 this movie came out, or about to be. I watched it multiple times when I was younger. Unlike the second one, I'm pretty sure I've only seen the second one the one time. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm probably gonna give this one like a 4, at least a 3.5, but probably a hard 4. I don't think I can stand to give it more than that. But it's not great, but it is fun. It is rewatchable, and I've said this before, and people don't always believe me, but like I have a hard time with modern Marvel because I feel like when I try to rewatch Marvel films from the past 5 to 7 years, I can't do it. They go stale real quick, and this does not. It's fun.
I completely agree. I think that this is a movie where I'm gonna go slightly lower than you.
Sure.
I'm gonna kind of agree with the critics on this one and go 2.5.
Okay.
I kind of had a little bit more like I'm a bit more of a cinephile than you are.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So like there were like details on this where I'm like, this is like a narrative like contradiction right here.
Yeah.
There's like this like the production design doesn't look, our costume design doesn't look all that great. The CGI is kind of crappy here, and what's up with this writing here? But like, I had a lot of fun, and like we established in our Swamp Thing episode, like just because something gets a low grade doesn't mean it's not worth your time. Like, this movie, I would definitely come back to.
Yeah,
like
I feel like you really rate based off of quality.
I based on quality and entertainment, but I'm also. Some of the other Nicolas Cage movies that we've kind of gone through, like Weatherman's like sticking really in, and Weatherman is one of my favorites that I've discovered on this journey, and I gave it like a 3.5, but I don't feel like it's on a quality of Weatherman.
Okay.
Weatherman's an incredible movie.
I mean, like 3.5 is still like a little lower. Like I'd be comfortable giving this movie a 3.5 if I were to really take in quality, but like. Yeah, for you to like a movie that much and still only give it a 3.5, that's I don't know. I don't know how to feel. What's your? Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Josh. And if you don't want to answer this on this episode because of maybe what movie it is or whether or not we've talked about it, that's fine. In fact, I'd rather wait on it for the sake of the podcast. But is there a Nicolas Cage movie that you would rate a 5?
Mandy, hands down.
Okay, heard. That makes sense.
Mandy,
that makes a ton of sense.
Hands down.
The fact that they changed like the aspect ratio so that it looked old, like, oh my gosh, that movie.
There's so much detail. But I would say like just because like it's rating lower on my scale like doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy it. Doesn't mean that I didn't have fun with it. Like this is not a movie that'd be like, well, it's terrible. Like I'm gonna be like, no, like
it's okay.
It's so much fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
Like, and I think that, you know, camp is one of those things that, like, I think John Waters defined camp as it's a bad movie that becomes so bad it's good.
Right.
And that's kind of where I feel like this movie lands.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Cool. That makes sense. I would see you say that, and I think of movies like The Stuff.
That's another one that I would put in this circle, though.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back talking about Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance.
Yeah.
The world has changed. A new evil is coming. We need the Rider. On February 17th, the world's darkest hero returns. Are you ready?
Say yes. Plus, I have some personal issues I kind of like to get fixed.
Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance in 3D and VOD 3D. Rated PG-13.
Welcome back to the Cage Corner podcast, and this double feature, we're talking about Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance, and man,
dude,
I had every intent of walking into this movie and hating it because I've never heard anything good about this movie, and I think I like this movie better than the first one.
It definitely is better than the first one objectively. Like it's better, it's more well made. At minimum, I felt like it's like not as fun in certain ways, but I probably like it better too.
Yeah, so it loses a little bit of the fun. It's like this weird space between like being like not like a direct sequel, but also not being in the same continuity. So it's kind of like moving from like Burton to Schumacher in the Batman continuity.
Yeah, that's weird. I don't like that, but you're right.
This movie feels darker, though.
It does. It feels like, so like, I think a lot of what we were talking about when it came to the first movie was like, Ghost Rider is such a character. They had such potential to make it a horror film. And I would not call this a horror film, but it had so many small aspects that you might see in horror. A lot of even Ghost Rider's movements in the early parts of the film, a lot of like, just kind of like sort of flashbang filmography. It's really not filmography, cinematography. It's really there and cool.
The way that he moves too, that like
That's what
little
I'm saying.
swagger way he like leads with his elbow or like his shoulder.
His shoulders, yeah.
And just like
It's like glitchy almost.
kind
Yeah.
of, but it almost reminds me of like the way that like Michael Myers or like Jason Voorhees moves after their victims. Like it feels very much in the homage of like a slasher villain.
Yeah, it does. It's very like it's stuttery. It's how I think we have come to think of dead people moving for some reason, because it's not fluid. It's very jagged. It's really cool. Really great effect.
And they really leaned into that
Yeah.
creepiness. Like the first time that we get to see Cage kind of like invest into like just lay into these bad guys, which are Kerrigan's.
Yeah, Kerrigan and his goons.
Like his like goons, like his like squad.
Yeah.
And like the very first, like he takes the chain, like burns a guy alive, like wraps around him, just ashes instantly. And then he just like walks over to another guy and just like starts like studying him.
Yeah.
Very much like I kind of got like Michael Myers vibes from that.
Sure.
There's a scene in the original Halloween where he kills a guy, hangs him to a wall, and he just slowly kind of like admires his handiwork and just kind of like moves his head back and forth. The penance stare in this one's a little bit differently.
Yeah.
It's never outright like vocal, like look at me.
It's not as dramatic, but it's
it's
creepy. Great. Yeah, it's real creepy and effective. Yeah.
And also too with this one, it like I think you said, like it's not an outright horror movie, but it definitely has those influences. A lot of, by the time, flowing right into spoiler alert.
Yeah. Sorry.
When Kerrigan becomes Blackout,
Yeah.
a lot of his solo asides with the people that he's decaying the life from, it just like instant horror movie vibes.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's just like, ooh, you do not want to watch this happen, but it is happening. Can we talk about Kerrigan real quick?
Let's jump into Kerrigan.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so Kerrigan is the name Kerrigan is movie specific. That's not in the comic book. The comic book character it's based off of is a Ghost Rider villain called Blackout. Another demon sort of thing. You know, you get a lot of that with these darker characters. His powers are completely and totally different. It's going to be like in the comics, it's going to be just I don't know. Like what was it? Let me see if I can find it again. Do you have the power set?
So while you are looking for...
Yeah, superhuman strength, speed, durability, reflexes.
Ray Kerrigan actually is in the comic books.
Is he?
He's the alter ego.
Oh, alter ego. There it is.
Of Blackout.
Psionic ability to extinguish light in his vicinity. Teeth and fingernails are prosthetic. That's not a ability, but here it is on the internet. So Ray Kerrigan is the alter ego, but they continue to call him Kerrigan throughout the movie instead of Blackout. They never use that name. But his look in the movie is really, really great. I do want to talk about the powers a second, though, because, I just read off those abilities, and you see pretty much none of them except for, like, maybe strength and durability. But you see him has this kind of decaying effect, and sometimes it works on everything. Sometimes it seems to only work on non-synthetics, so like organics. There is a Spider-Man villain called Carrion, and that is one of his abilities, is that he can decay organic matter. I don't know why they sort of spliced that in, along with the name, maybe, potentially, into this movie, I think, for just the shock and awe and the visuals of it, because it's gross and it's satisfying. Really, really random. That villain has nothing to do with Ghost Rider.
I'm almost kind of curious how young of a villain that is too, because Blackout,
70s, I think, was Blackout.
Okay, so Blackout
No,
made his
90.
debut in June or July of 1990,
Yeah.
Ghost Rider #2.
Yeah.
Which, again, is interesting that you would splice almost, I would probably say, like a C or D level Spider-Man villain
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah, and like a late 70s one at that. Yeah. Even like if you look at his like partnerships or whatever that he's had with other villains, the most notable one is probably Cletus Cassidy. Like it's not really you're right. He's like a D-list Spider-Man villain. It's not even it's weird. But
So-
I guess they own the rights. We talked about that though too,
Yeah,
right?
so Sony owns the rights
Yeah.
to, not anymore, but at this time that this film was coming out, they singularly owned the rights to Ghost Rider and Spider-Man alike. So theoretically, like, you could have had a Rider Spider-Man crossover Venom like super universe, whatever you wanted to do.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I want to talk about here is, like, when we first meet Ray Kerrigan, he's introduced fairly early into this movie. He's just an average guy.
Kind of looks like a who do we say?
Cross between Bruce Campbell and
like,
Jim Carrey.
Like Jim Carrey. Yeah, it's weird.
So this is my thing about this movie, and this is going to kind of lead into a little bit more of my negatives.
Okay.
I feel like his transformation into Blackout came a little too late in the movie for me.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that. And it was like, I will say that might be the only time issue this movie had. I feel like I had a lot of time issues, rushing and things like that with the first movie. But this movie, you're right. I think his transformation into Kerrigan came very, very late. And then it was almost like they had to like late rush Kerrigan into his like villainous position.
Yeah, so the thing that I enjoy sometimes about like comic book sequels over actual comic book origin stories are the fact that you don't have that issue with the origin. So like Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a great example of this. Like Spider-Man's already established in that universe.
Right.
And so the origin portion of the first act you're building out to Electro. Right. And kind of that transformation from Max Dillon into Electro. And here, I think at the same time, it's like they waited a little bit too long. Like the narrative and the pacing of everything about this, with the exception of maybe like the divine eloquence journey that Nicolas Cage goes on, we'll talk about it in just a little bit. Like, I feel like the majority of this is a pretty tight narrative. Yeah. And so you have that, like, if you didn't see the original 2007 Ghost Rider, they do this, like, 30 to 60 minute, like, recap of, like, his origin story of, like, how he became the Rider in the beginning of the movie. Yeah. It's very quick. So you eliminate that right off the bat, but you're still, like, so you have the freedom to kind of, like, play with your origin story of your villain. And this one, I feel like they just waited way too long to kind of do it.
I can definitely see that, because Kerrigan was just like this guy and he's hunting down this boy, and Idris Elba's character has, kind of like try to make a deal with the writer, like, you have to go find this boy, and him and his like whole barrage of monks are looking for this boy, and Kerrigan is for kind of other reasons, but then you find out later it all kind of converges. I do think it was a good idea, definitely, to like really have that Kerrigan villain like really come into what he was, despite being different from the comic books. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it just kind of happens too late, but it was definitely more satisfying than like, oh look, it's Ghost Rider and a bunch of human men with guns. And that's it.
Like, if I could like change a couple of things about this movie, the first one would definitely be like the first intro that we get to Kerrigan and his crew. That would have been the perfect spot to kind of like leave him for dead, and then the devil resurrects him.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see why not at all. have like one good encounter with him and the woman, Danny's mother, and the boy Danny himself, so that she knows who he is. Maybe have her see the transformation or the aftermath of the transformation, so that she knows who he is and what he looks like after becoming Blackout, and then take the movie from there with a more developed villain.
And this movie gives us two villains, and I feel like you're always gonna have the underlining villain of
it's interesting.
The devil.
The movie kind of gives us almost three because of, this is real spoilery, but because of the monks at that.
Oh yeah,
yeah. At that point,
yeah, the monks are kind of one of those weird elements that exist in this movie that I feel like kind of sit outside of like the main story.
Yeah.
Like they're used as like a very quick plot device.
Yeah.
But they're like intertwined a bit too much for me.
Okay, interesting. I thought they were fine. I was glad they did not deal more with them than they did, though. Like, I didn't think they were on screen too long or anything like that.
I feel like they kind of existed to like emphasize like Danny's darkness for one, but also to kind of show off Blackout's power, because that's really the full capability. That's like the first time we get the full capability of like who he is as a character and like what his power set is around humans, because we see it with the lunch where he like is trying to eat the bread and the apple and then of course doesn't
affect the Twinkie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I really like too. Briefly, the humor in this movie is really satisfying. I only felt
very
it was
subtle.
Yeah, it is really subtle. I only felt that it was forced at one point in time, because Idris Elba's character, like, I was only saved by the grace of God, and then like he's like hanging from a tree.
Yeah.
And it was like kind of funny, but it was definitely forced. And the rest of the movie is just like at the end when Ghost Rider like grabs the devil with his chain and swings him down into the earth, and he's like, "Go home." It's like, oh, because you can't tell the devil to go to hell. Like, like the stuff like that was really satisfying and fun. The humor was really, really good, and it felt more like almost actually, yeah, I'm gonna say his name again, like Bruce Campbell-y sort of humor, where it's like really, really obvious and almost cheesy, but it belongs there.
So can we? I want to pause on the humor element real quick.
Yeah,
and kind of jump into finishing up with the villains.
Do it.
So this one gives us no Mephistopheles.
Yeah, not by that name.
This one gives us Rourke, who is the kind of almost like the devil in human form, so it's kind of almost like Zeus or like Ghost in the Shell mythology kind of approach to it.
Yeah.
And
I like the way they explain it though, because like, gosh, I've seen so many movies where the sequel does, like, they had to replace an actor or an actress in the sequel of a movie, and whether the sequel's good or not, that just sort of like really messes with a lot of the mojo, I feel like. And so they give a really great explanation and turn it into a big part of the story. The idea that like the devil can exist on Earth in a human form, but that human form can only contain his power to an extent. Mm-hmm. I feel like that. I love that they did that. Whether, I don't know why they chose to omit the name Mephisto or Mephistopheles or whatever from the film, but I thought they handled the different actor very well.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think that this film does really strongly, is kind of like explain the mythology very simply, and like doesn't ever overemphasize it.
Right.
Peter Fonda did a alright job as Mephistopheles in the first one, but I think
he looked really good.
Yeah, I think Killian, I'm probably gonna butcher this dude's name, Killian Hines, who we know as Steppenwolf. He's done from Justice League, he's done Game of Thrones, he's done a plethora of just other great, like he embodies that character so well.
Yeah.
And I enjoy the fact that like that one aside where they're kind of like explaining Rourke and his being like the husk basically for the devil, how they kind of show like it was Hitler, it was Stalin, and then randomly Jerry Springer. Yeah.
Yeah, again, like that like subtle humor that it's like, this doesn't need to be here, but it's great.
And that's kind of one of the things that the filmmakers behind this, Mark Nivedine and Brian Taylor, they're the two guys that did the Crank movies, and while I wasn't a huge fan of them, like their ability to subtly add humor into stuff, very well done.
Yeah.
Love that a lot.
Yeah,
and
especially in this film.
This film just kind of like, you can feel their influence, and it feels like they're more the guys that need it to be here to handle this character rather than the last writer-director we had.
Yeah. David S. Goyer, though, his presence in this movie, like as the screenwriter and stuff, like...
Oh, there's a lot of screenwriters. So this one looks like it actually went through a few different hands. Well, I guess not. It's so David S. Goyer was the one that kind of came up with the story, and then him and Seth Hoffman are the actual two that wrote this screenplay. And a lot of what he has done as far as writing has been more notorious with television. So he's written episodes for The Walking Dead, Vegas, and House, Prison Break. So it's interesting that this is his only like cinematic screenwriting.
Goyer?
Hoffman.
Oh, Hoffman. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, those are really solid shows, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like David S. Goyer, he's done, I mean, so many superhero properties, both Marvel and DC, done like really great. I mean, he did the Dark Knight trilogy and like stuff like that. As well as writing Justice Society comic books actually for DC, so that's pretty cool.
Some that have actually, and it's also worth noting that he's done so much fandom properties that some haven't even actually seen the big screen.
True.
Most notoriously Green Lantern, or the Green Arrow.
Yeah.
Supermax, we were supposed to get back in 2008.
Yep. Yeah, and that just... I don't even think it was ever stated that was canned. It's just been in production purgatory for however long.
Yeah, and so with this one, though, coming back to Ghost Rider, how do you feel like they handled the mythology of his character and kind of the surrounding worlds?
Ghost Rider, and specifically? Yeah, I think you're right. They did a really like simple. All right, they did the backstory in sort of flashbacks, like the origin story in flashbacks, and that was really, really satisfying. It does change. It makes it look like it was completely different from the first film, but it's not offensive. It works really, really well. I don't know if this is a weird movie to talk about, but like the most recent Hellboy film, I think that was something they did really well, where it was like, this is not an origin film, but we're going to slap the origin story halfway through the movie and then move on, and I think they handled it gracefully. I guess just how Nick Cage specifically, because I just want to talk about his acting so much in this movie, Nick Cage like really sort of, he will like preface the writer, because he doesn't necessarily have control of the writer is kind of in the driver's seat, no pun intended. But he knows the writer, he knows the way that he is. And so like so much of his acting before the writer comes out is like that weird laughing and that weird, like those over the top, like threats to people and stuff like that. And it's a lot of fun, a lot of really, very, very Nick Cage, very what people have come to, I think, know him for. But some of the stuff that I really want to talk about is, so Idris Elba's character, whose name I can never remember. It sounds like bro. We were talking about that. If somebody yells it just sounds like bro. Moreau. Okay. Yeah. So Moreau's character, he like, they make a deal essentially that if the writer will help procure this child, who is the son of the devil, because his mother made a deal, Nick Cage's character, Johnny Blaze, wants to know, like, what is the writer? Like, before I get rid of this, what is it? So Moreau explains, he's like, there was an angel whose name was Zarathos. He was God's spirit of justice. And he was basically, like, captured by demons, tortured, became the spirit of vengeance. And then the rest is history. So in the comic books, it's not entirely untrue. They never take the angel angle on Zarathos. But if you could extrapolate that all demons were once angels, so it makes a whole lot of sense. But Zarathos was a demon of vengeance, and he was actually the entity that Mephisto binds to Johnny Blaze after he makes the deal. And it wasn't the first Ghost Rider doesn't end until Zarathos is actually removed from Johnny. So like very cool way to maintain but extrapolate and expound upon some comic book accuracy there in the movie. That was all very, very satisfying.
And you had kind of explained it that it's almost kind of the relationship between Etrick and the demon
and Jason Blood. Yeah, very much the same, where it's just like, this is a curse. I would say Jason Blood has a little bit more control over it because he's like gone form of man, says the whole thing. So Jason Blood has more of a control over it and a weird, like, almost symbiosis with Etrigan. But yeah, as where the Rider will come out in the presence of evil pretty exclusively / at night. Yeah.
One of the scenes that I really enjoyed was the scene where Johnny and Nadia are interrogating the guy in the club.
Yeah.
And he's like, you don't want him to come out. You don't want him to come out. And it's kind of like you're getting these like glimpses of like his like eye is like starting to like fold into the skull shape, and like then it actually culminates in that amazing bike sequence.
Yeah.
Where he's like laughing and like it's kind of like going and going. It's like visually it's so beautiful.
It's
like
it is
chaos.
Yeah.
Like beauty personified.
Yeah. It's so and it's like, I mean, it's silly, but it's not cheesy. It's very satisfying. Especially like, I don't know, this movie, more than any other Nick Cage movie, actually did remind me at parts of Mandy. And that was one of those parts where it was just like, this is so well filmed. This is so just chaotic and weird, and I love it. It's so great.
What's weird, and like the camera angles, like almost kind of like become like a second character in that sequence, particularly where it's like it's not just staying on Nick Cage like front and center, like it's basically coming and going, like it's showing you like different angles, but it's like they're all quick cuts.
Yeah.
But the kind of almost like heavy metal nature of that particular sequence like needs that, and I feel like that's one thing that these directors know really well.
Yeah, super, super cool. A lot of really, like, so we really raved in the first film about a lot of the really beautiful, like, scenic shots. Mm-hmm. This movie definitely doesn't disappoint there, but I feel like that this movie specifically, you get a lot more where, like, yeah, they were intentional in filming action like it was, like the camera itself was as much a part of the action as whatever it was filming. Yeah.
Sure, and I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that you are bringing in guys that know action for one. They're coming from Crank.
Yep.
Whereas Mark, the director on the 2007 version, kind of at that time like had only done like really like lowly received like either comedies or like he has like a really weird filmography.
Yeah.
And it doesn't kind of fit for a Ghost Rider movie, and that's evident after watching this one. Like this one feels more like a Ghost Rider movie, and it feels more like a Nicolas Cage movie as well.
Hardcore.
And one of the things that I want to talk about, you talk about the camera kind of almost being like a staple portion of the action sequences and how they move and stuff like this. And I think the setting is equally as also where it's, you're seeing a lot more of Romania and Turkey where this movie was filmed. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more desolate. We talked about this. It has a lot more of like a post-apocalyptic feel.
Yeah.
Which is something I feel like you need with a Ghost Rider character. And I feel like when we talked about the first one, like it kind of, when you compare the two, like I really wouldn't think of like big cities and like showing off population and stuff like that doesn't feel like a Ghost Rider to me.
Right. It doesn't feel like a biker property at all.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like they definitely utilize a lot more of the sets. This one, they feel a lot more at home with this one.
Yes. Yeah. Even sort of from, if you want to look at it from like a comic book angle, because you know how many comic books you read and it's like the background is really ill. Ground is just a setting for the characters and for the dialogue and the action. So it's really, really cool how, like in the beginning when Moreau finds him and he's just in this abandoned place that's not in America, and you go outside and there's just more abandoned buildings and it's all nondescript. And Ghost Rider feels really at home in it. It feels like really, really comic book and really appropriate.
And it stays there until there's a very select hand shots where this world's actually populated, where you have the club scene for one, and then you also have
the pickpocket scene.
The pickpocket scene's another good one, and then the other one that I'm thinking of is where they go to the diner. But everything else just kind of feels so desolate.
Yep.
And that's what I think helps this film thrive so well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, there's so many things I feel like I want to say. I don't know what to go to next. Something that's really interesting. I feel like with movies, like supernatural fiction in general, whether it's comic book or a movie or whatever, you always get sort of like, you get into conspiracy territory. So I loved, it was really satisfying toward the end when there's that like sort of Colosseum-esque place that where after they capture Danny, after Kerrigan captures Danny and takes him to his father, the devil, they are, and that's where they sort of, they begin to explain like, you know, the devil's body is just a human form. He has a lot of power, but it wastes away. And being that the boy is only half human, the idea is that they're going to sort of transfer consciousnesses from the devil into that older body into the boy. But anyway, something that I really loved about this is so Johnny and Moreau and them are like looking with their binoculars and like, who are all these people? Because there's people in suits gathered outside this like Coliseum for this ritual. And he's like, murderers, politicians, you know, everybody, you know, all the important people gathered to celebrate like the new king. And that's just like so conspiracy theory kind of laden, and that's so satisfying. Like the idea that like, yeah, politicians are into weird stuff. Like that kind of thing's super interesting.
So I didn't actually take it in that way, but I assumed that a lot of the people that are in those like black robes and kind of like understanding like that, you know, they have a debt.
Yeah.
It's kind of almost like I looked at all of those people as people that made deals with the devil.
Interesting. Yeah. So I don't hate that angle, but I feel like, you know, you only encounter a couple people in the movies who have actually made deals with the devil, but except for Kerrigan, who already has malicious intent, the other two people who made deals regret the deals.
Yeah.
Like the girl kind of, she doesn't because she loves her son, but it's now like this thing that she has to live with. And then like, Johnny's much the same, where it's just like, all I got was pain and death. I don't want this anymore, but then I'm powerless without it. And so there's this weird like dichotomy. So that could be. I don't hate that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you got to think like if there's good, there has to be bad. If there's people that hate making the deals, there has to be people
who wanted to make the deal. Yeah, maybe even people who sought out the deal. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of is interesting to me, and. There are a couple of scenes in here that I feel like kind of just don't belong.
Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah,
the biker scene is definitely one of them where it's him, Moreau, and Danny, like all of them kind of like riding bikes alongside Nadia in the truck. Like that just kind of just didn't seem to fit for me.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I kind of like... I enjoy how they sort of try to connect Danny and Johnny because they're both in weird, well, shall we say, spiritual positions.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, there's that awkward scene in the diner where, like, Danny sees, like, a dad, like, rubbing his son's head, you know, just being affectionate. And, like, Johnny, like, notices it. And, of course, it's Nick Cage, and he's really awkward, and, you know, he's... He's been like sort of social distancing in Europe for however long, and so he like tries to like brush the kid's hair, and he's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, you had like a bee. You had a bee. I did tricks," and there was like this weird music, and it was like a montagey thing, and it just, that is the one part of the movie that absolutely feels cheesy, and I don't think it's necessary. I think it's the idea of calling back to the fact that Johnny Blaze is a trick, like cyclist, motorcyclist is super cool. I just don't think that was the way that they needed to do it, personally. However, on the note of really cool vehicles, the fact that like everything turned to flames whenever he touched it, like that big like I want to call
like
it
18-wheeler,
yeah, that really really huge, like in that scene where it's right before Kerrigan dies and changes. Mm-hmm. But like that huge machine, and he's like laughing and riding it around. It's all in flames. That was
kind of like almost like that construction scene.
Yeah,
and like the camera does a really good job at kind of like almost like setting it up, like studying it. Because if you look at it really closely, like it's almost this big wheel that has like all of these like chains and gears that are in it.
Yeah.
I thought that was handled very subtly.
It was super cool. And also in that scene, I love that you get to sort of like the rider like looks up and he's like, all right, there's kind of a cockpit to this thing. I can drive it, and I love that because I think, there can be debate on this, but it's sometimes kind of handled like the rider is just there to judge, and he's a little bit
So I love the fact that, just kind of like reading off of some of the transitions between like the 2007 more lighthearted version and kind of the drunker version. So Nicolas Cage stated in this one that I love this press quote that he gives. He says, quote, "He's not eating jelly beans anymore. He's getting drunk."
yeah, and that's that's pretty apt.
Yeah,
and that's honestly that's a great description of one movie to the other. It really, really is. One movie feels like a superhero movie, and it's fun, but it's not well made. And the second movie doesn't. It's just so easy to take seriously and just meld so well into the world.
Was the camera pans throughout the bike too? It just looks charred.
Yeah.
Like, it just looks like the earth split open, hell rose up, and this bike just went right out of there.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think from a visual standpoint too, this film does really well.
Yeah.
One of the things that I feel like kind of helps it feel kind of almost like retain its comic book roots is some of the animations that they do throughout the course of this.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And the animations we get that are obviously of note are the ones that your recap of his origin story. Yep. You're getting the Rourke kind of like origin story of like how the devil like moves from body to body in like generations throughout.
That's the Jerry Springer thing.
The Jerry Springer thing. Then you get the I can't remember the angel, but like the angel of like how he became like the spirit of vengeance or the spirit of judgment or the spirit of vengeance.
Yeah, Zarathos.
Yeah, and then you kind of get like various ones throughout.
And fight scenes and stuff. There's like black and white cartoony looking punches and stuff. Yeah,
I think too one of the ones that I really liked. There's two in particular that I really liked. I thought that were really well done. Were the ones where he goes into the kind of like divine cave almost to like give up his powers of Ghost Rider of the Rider, and it's just kind of like that black. It's all black, and then it kind of like fades into like white, and like the rider's black, and he just opens his jaw and like is giving out these chains.
Yeah,
that one was done really cool.
Yeah, super cool.
And probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie was the scene where him and Danny are talking, and Danny's just like, if you're the rider, like what happens when you gotta pee. And there's a callback to it in the finale between Rourke and Danny.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's just like, oh yeah, no, it's like a flamethrower. It's awesome.
And you don't ever think they're actually going to show it, and like, boom,
They
it's a
show it.
black screen, and it's just Ghost Rider. Just urinate it.
Being fire. Yeah, super, super cool. Probably the best. I want to bring this. We have to bring this up. The best line in the whole film. So it's like, there's a 2,000-year-old bottle of wine that like Moreau was talking about when they were with the monks, and this is at the end of the film now, and they brought it with them, and they're about to go fight the bad guys, you know. And of course, like at this point, they had done their little like ritual communion thing, and so the Zarathos spirit is gone, and Blaze is just Blaze, but he still feels like a real conviction to help, and so they just like break it open, and you know they each taste it, and they're like, and the first guy's like, "It's okay." Moreau's like, "It's okay," and Nick Cage's character Johnny just goes, "Yeah, probably be good on some salad." And it's just like the line just comes out of nowhere, and it's just right before all this crazy stuff, and it's just beautiful.
I think one of the things that helps that too is that the humor in this, like Nicolas Cage is just like deadpanned.
Yeah,
every time.
He's only not deadpan when he's like, you know, like just before, or just after the writer, because he's still kind of crazed or getting crazed, and you see that in the first movie.
One of the things in the other one too is when he throws and finally ends Blackout. And he just looks back and just goes, roadkill. Yeah. And it's all whispered, and it's actually Nick Cage like doing the voice, and oh man, it's so awesome. I think too, one of the things that I really enjoyed about this movie that makes it better than the first movie right out the gate is like it's grounded, but yet it's like dark enough to kind of like teeter-totter between like the realistic and like the fantastical really well. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact of like, we talked about the bike, we talked about the costume design for Ghost Rider, because the very first time we see Ghost Rider, both of us were like, he looks amazing. Like it's such a major improvement,
and it's so simple. Like
Yeah.
he looks more simple, but looks way better.
Yeah, like the CGI is like definitely more defined, and like I guess it's a lot with the lighting too. I think is a lot better. Like an example from like the first one was like the one where he's like on the skyscraper with it, and it just kind of like you have like all the cop lights shining on it, and it just kind of feels like, does it feel like Ghost Rider in that sense?
Sure.
The lighting and I feel like the lighting in this one is kind of like almost kind of like the camera angle, like even when we get to the monks, like it's very, like you had said, like it's very thematic.
Yeah.
You can kind of tell like there are parts of this that feel like dark and grimy, and then once you kind of get around like the good guys, like you feel like very like divine and angelic.
Yeah. That a lot of the lighting around the monks and stuff is very just like orange yellow, very warm. And it's completely different. It's
Not be where we are. And I think that, you know, when you try to talk to some people about like religion in particular, like it's just as an example, it's like, well, I've done too much bad in me to like be remade. Or if you're like trying to appeal to someone that is in the thralls of depression, as we are trying to do, you know, you get that same kind of thing where it's like you get so wrapped up in that depression, and like all you feel is, you know, suicide or self-harm or addiction. Like those are the only things that, you know, you're good for. And you know, I think that from someone that has been in that mindset, and from someone that has battled those demons,
sure,
you know, I think that when Moreau says, you know, like out of darkness sometimes can be birthed light. You know, and I think that transformation of redemption is one of the best parts of this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really like, it really rings true even to the very end, because like, you know, after the end, like the boy ends up, well, basically dead. And you know, they've just battled everyone, and like Nick Cage has kind of come down off of being the writer again because the boy is able to give him back his powers because the boy has the powers of his father, the devil. You know, Nick Cage like laughs, and it's that weird Nick Cage laugh because he's like half crying at the time, half laughing, and it just feels cringy and not cringy, creepy and fun for the movie. But he's like, his hand starts, it's bone still, but it's blue fire. And he's like, he laughs. And he's like, I can feel him. I can feel Zarathos, the angel. Yeah, because the idea is that like even in that angel, there is still good, you know. And the idea of being, rather than the spirit of vengeance, the spirit of justice. And he's able to like use his power to like actually bring someone back to life, which is very the opposite of before. Yeah,
and I guess to kind of like, you know, kind of get more into like before we get into like a little bit more of the technical side.
Yeah.
I just want to encourage anyone that's listening, like, never think that you're too far gone. Because redemption is, I think, something that is always going to be a human, very basic human understanding, a very basic need, and something that can be created brand new day in and day out.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I want to get into the technical terms.
Go for it.
I love the first hour of this movie.
Okay.
Once he gives up his powers, I kind of thought we were getting into like the Fan 4 stick kind of thing, where it's like they did a beautiful opening, everything was well paced, and then you get into this like very sloppy third act. And honestly, I kind of don't like the fact that he gives up his powers in this.
Sure.
How did you feel?
I feel like it makes sense for him to give up his power. Like, it does and it doesn't. It depends on sort of... So, like, if we're comparing this to the first movie, it doesn't make sense because he ends the first movie wanting to own the power. But he also doesn't really know what the power is.
Yeah.
So there's that. But if you look at it, this movie, like, if you were to just... Maybe you didn't know about the first Ghost Rider movie and you were like, oh, Ghost Rider's, you know, Spirit of Vengeance. I'm just going to watch this, you know, and you watched it by itself, which you can do. It is self-contained enough
Very
to do.
much.
So if you've never seen either of them, maybe start with this one. But yeah, so if you're looking at it at the lens of just this movie and just this movie alone, it makes a ton of sense, I think, for him to want to give up his power. I think you could kind of go either way when he finds out really what it is, especially since he has this perspective that he told to the boy of like what we are or what's inside of us does not define us.
Yeah.
So it almost doesn't make sense, like after he finds out what it was and truly is, that's giving him this ability. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make as much sense that he'd want to give it up. But I think at the same time, like, there is this great, you know, at the end with the boy and the boy being the son of the devil and like the devil like trusting him, but the boy still having already grown close to Johnny. The boy like, you know, puking fire over Johnny's head and like making him awesome. Yeah. Making him the writer again. That, I don't know. I think that scene's worth it. I think that whole like that character development toward the end is really, really worth it. And I think you do begin to see, after the boy gets captured and stuff, you begin to see Johnny's regret at giving the writer up. So I think you can argue it out if you want to. I really do like the way that it pans out in the end.
So I'm kind of like torn because like initially like I'm like I really thought that like, okay, they're setting up the angel of justice thing, like, or is it justice or judgment?
I thought it was justice.
Okay, we'll go with justice.
I could be wrong.
So they're setting up the angel of justice, like they give all that, and I'm like, okay, he's gonna give it up, and justice is gonna rise up, and kind of like you're gonna get like a more traditional superhero ending. Cool.
Right. Oh, you thought it was just gonna happen?
I thought it was just gonna happen.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
And so, like, when they show that, no, it's like, it's completely gone.
Yeah.
Like, he's just a man now that's going to go up against the devil. I was like, okay,
Sure.
let's just ride this out and see where it goes. But I think that you do make a good point in it where it's like it does make for a really good character moment in that regards of, you know, Johnny or Danny giving Johnny back the rider powers, Ryder sending Rourke back to hell, and then ultimately end up with, you know, bringing him back to life. Like it kind of like does do a really good job at kind of containing that.
Yeah.
But again, I feel like I would have liked it to happen like a little bit earlier.
Sure. I mean, I get it. I would have loved to see. So, like, the very last thing you see in the movie is the Ryder riding, but he's blue fire now.
Yeah.
I think I would have loved, like, an awesome battle scene or something with him, like, using the blue fire. But I liked what we got. I don't like that we didn't get a third movie or a second movie, however you want to look at it.
So there's a yeah, they talked about it for a while.
Yeah.
Nick Cage was very much on the fence of like whether or not he was going to return for it or not.
Because this movie, I mean, I looked it up the other day after we were done with the
terribly
first one.
received. Everyone hates this movie.
Like it was not well received, but it didn't monetarily fail. But it's very interesting because this movie came out in 2012, so like Marvel Studios had been established, Iron Man had been successful. You know, like superhero movies were up and coming and running at that. And so it's really interesting to me that the movie didn't do well, or didn't, you know, get rated well enough.
But you're also, this comes out in 2012, so you're also coming up against the culmination of MCU's first phase in the Avengers.
Yeah.
And then only 2 months later, coming into the finale of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy.
True.
So you have these two juggernauts that you're coming up against.
Do you think it maybe went under the radar? Do you think maybe if it had been released at a different time, even different time of that year, it would have done better?
I think no.
Okay.
I think that because this movie is just kind of misunderstood. Because we talked about this a little bit in the first Ghost Rider conversation, where you're getting into this like time period where like we still don't know. And I think that even today, because this is 3 years after Watchmen came out, a movie that I think wasn't very well received in its original, but has garnered, you know, praise and kind of like almost snuggled itself under like the status of cult.
Yeah.
And I feel like this movie kind of is almost deserving of that. I feel like the writing's definitely better in this one, which again, like Rotten Tomatoes like went after like the CGI, the acting, the writing, like they tore this movie apart. I think it's like got like a
I think it's like a 21%
on Rotten Tomatoes. And to me, like I feel like there are parts of the plot that I feel like I could have done without, but I feel like you instantly can kind of almost get turned off by a 90-minute superhero movie because we're so programmed to think that superhero movies have to be 2 hours or they're not good. And that's not inherently the case here.
Yeah.
I feel like the narrative is tighter. There are problems with the narrative that I would have liked to see, but overall, I thoroughly enjoyed myself more on this one than I did the other one. I feel like this one definitely warrants rewatches. I love the subtle humor. I love the animations and graphics of this movie. So honestly, I think that it kind of, people, you know, at that time had seen Iron Man, they had seen the first Captain America, they could see what a superhero movie was supposed to be. And then I think that this one didn't look like it's Marvel's brothers and sisters, and
I think that's I think that's it. That's the ticket. Is that like people came to recognize superhero movies in a formulaic sense, and this movie,
people to this day still say the same about a lot of the DCU films. Now, Suicide Squad, I'll give you, Suicide Squad has its moments,
sure,
but as a film, like it's like it's a very sloppily edited movie.
Yeah.
And that isn't, I don't think, at any fault of Ayer, the director.
Yep.
I think that's more kind of like studio involvement. And I think that this one feels like a darker film. So in regards, I feel like because it's not happy Sunshine Marvel movie, it's darker.
Yeah, you're right.
So you kind of have people that aren't going to like it.
Right. It's not a family film, and it doesn't feel like it. It is a superhero film, but it doesn't feel like it. You mentioned something about like the branding of it because it's branded under the Marvel Knights.
Yeah, so this one is this and Punisher Warzone are Marvel Knight movies, and I think that Marvel kind of, when you have these darker approaches, Marvel kind of doesn't want their name associated with it, so they're like, the Knights line is a little bit darker than what we traditionally have, so it makes sense from that kind of standpoint, where they're kind of like Elseworld movies.
Yeah. Do you think... So I decided to look it up just for the sake of like the branding and stuff. Punisher Warzone has an R rating, which is pretty uncommon among superhero films. Among comic book films, I wouldn't consider Punisher a superhero, but many would. And it only got a 29 on Rotten Tomatoes. Now this was 4 years earlier, so the landscape looked different at the time. But do you think, just for the sake of maybe arguing it out, do you think that like they had a vision for Marvel Knights, and that vision was, this movie is merely a continuation of that vision?
I think it hinged on the vision that you wanted to have for the movie, of whether or not it would get the Marvel branding or the Marvel Knights branding.
Oh, okay.
Because when you look at the first Punisher movie with John Travolta and Thomas Jane, it's very much in the vein of like the comic book lore of that character.
Yeah.
But when you get into the second film and you get into Warzone, it's definitely a lot more comic book accurate, and it goes a lot more darker. And I feel like that's kind of the same with these Ghost Rider movies. The first one feels very much like that epic, we're going to try and reach as many people as possible comic book movie, and then you get into this. And so I'm kind of almost wondering if like there's like a clause in like Lionsgate, who released the Punisher movies, and then also Columbia that released these Ghost Rider movies, if like there's a clause in the contract that like Marvel has to give the approval first to like understand like which banner it's going to go under. Yeah. If that makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah. I don't know. I just I don't know, like very, very genuinely, like, no, okay, let's be honest. No, there's no such thing as a perfect movie. No movie is flawless. If you want to be really, really honest about it, like, they're all made by humans. I'm sorry, it's just kind of a thing. You want to debate about like Watchmen or whatever, that's fine. Because I know you really love Watchmen.
I was actually going to debate about Mandy, since it's a Nicolas Cage podcast.
Fair enough. Yeah, but like, I don't think there's a such thing as a perfect movie without flaws at all, especially since movies are largely like subjective, So that being said, I genuinely, after watching this movie again, like trying to do so without any sort of bias aside from just enjoying Nicolas Cage, and many don't, I don't see why this movie did as poorly as it did. I really don't. It is a far cry better than the first one in so many ways. I think you're right that it has the potential to be considered a quote-unquote cult film, because it has a lot of aspects that cult films do. It's sort of that like post-apocalyptic desert movie sort of feel, Mad Max, Waterworld, that sort of thing. It has like a somewhat almost kind of a B-rated horror feel to it. It has like those comic booky expositions that like Scott Pilgrim has. Like so many awesome elements. I don't get it. I don't understand.
I think it's the same argument that people have for BVS, is that, or Man of Steel, is that these movies are, when you think of comic books, I think that another thing that Marvel has kind of done to the general population is that they think these movies have to be hopeful and sunshine. That's why there was so much backlash when Infinity War came out, because, spoiler alert, all the heroes died in the end.
Yeah.
At least half of them did.
Yeah.
And it's like, you just kind of like feel hopeful walking out of the majority of these movies.
Yeah.
And you don't really have that, I feel like, with some of the Snyder versions we've gotten, whether it has been Watchmen, whether it has been BVS, Man of Steel, even I would imagine Justice League, the Snyder Cut has some of that to a degree.
Yeah.
And I feel like for this one, the reason that a lot of people didn't like it was because it didn't feel like the original. Because it didn't have that sense of hopeless. And I feel like that was my first problem with the original one, was the fact that it doesn't feel like a Ghost Rider movie. I feel like I have an expectation for mythologies that are based around hell, which is the darkest place man can think of.
Sure.
Like, it needs to have those elements of horror. It needs to have those elements of, like, terror, and like I think that this one just embodies what I envision of when I think of Ghost Rider.
Yeah, it does. It does. I think you're right. It's just like people are like, "Oh, it's a Marvel movie," and then from that moment on, they have an expectation, and when that expectation isn't met, regardless of the quality of movie, people don't like it, and it's really unfair.
And also, too, I talked about this recently in like on my own social media. I just recently, about a month ago, went through the Hellraiser movies, and Hellraiser Judgment, which is the most recent direct-to-video sequel. You know, you're coming into an age where like a large portion of people in the Hellraiser franchise, like, they don't like a lot of the sequels after 2. So you have 8 movies that are considered trash. But one of the things that I think I really liked about Judgment is the fact that you're engaging in spiritual warfare.
Sure.
And I think that when you're having stories that are involving hell to some capacity, it's really interesting, really fascinating to me that you're bringing in the spiritual warfare aspect.
Yeah.
Because it's not only enthralling me as a horror fan, comic book fan, but also as someone of spirituality.
Sure. Yeah.
And I feel like this film even brings that in here, and that's
it does.
As much as I don't like the monk sequences, I think that they feel very much at home in this one.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So we're revving up our Cage scale. 0 to 5. Half points are allotted. Where would this rank for you?
You always make me go first.
I guess, bro.
Yeah. Let's see. See, I rated the last one at like a 3.5 or a 4, just because it's really, really fun. 3.5 would probably be more comfortable for the first movie, because like it's just, especially watching this one now. I don't know. See, this one's not as fun, but it's way more satisfying, and I think it's more my kind of movie. I think I'm gonna go ahead and give it like a hard 4.
I'm gonna go with 3.5.
Okay.
I liked this movie so much more than the other one, and I just pulled up my Letterboxd review, and I gave it a 2.5. That movie failed on a lot of standpoints.
Sure.
But I feel like this movie definitely redeems it. Like, almost everything about this movie looks better.
Yep.
Even the villain.
Yep.
But there are some things that kind of keep the narrative from, feeling convoluted and kind of like, I don't know, they just kind of like rub me the wrong way as a writer or as a viewer, so I'm going to stick at a 3.5.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's above average.
So I think
that's an above average rating.
That is going to do it for us on this episode, but we have another special bonus episode for you guys. So if you guys are currently listening to this, go check out our Moonstruck episode as well, and we'll be back next month, I think.
Yeah.
What are we talking about next month?
Who knows?
Who knows? I think we talked about Raising Arizona.
Oh, we did talk about we did talk about Raising Arizona.
So we'll be back next month talking about Raising Arizona.
Yeah.
So until next time, keep caging.